Yes, thank you for the possibility to present this story about organic soils in Baltics. After trying to combine all the situation in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, I came to conclusion that it will be easier for me to go with the case study of Latvia. It will be maybe not so much about mitigation options, but more about history of the process, how we started and where we are at the moment now. It's not ended story, it's just starting, let's say, just like in previous presentations. About organic soils, we don't have so much as in Finland. A bit less than 20% of the country is covered by organic forests. Most of them are still in wetlands, non-drained wetlands. If you compare with some Western Europe countries, we are very rich with these pristine wet organic soils. About 30% of organic soils in forest lands are non-drained. And if you are speaking about croplands and grasslands and settlements on organic soils, except settlements maybe, these are also mostly former forest lands. These are not wetlands. It's quite big difference which should be considered. In previous life, they were forest lands mostly. Yes, some history again. It was started about 10 years ago when we started to move from IPCC guidelines, good practice guidelines, to more advanced and modern guidelines. And if 10 years ago organic soils was minor source of emissions, with some key categories, after moving to IPCC 2006, we realized that we have a lot of key sources in this category. And a year ago, we were encouraged to move to IPCC 2030 or 40, depending how we are interpreting this title, wetland supplement. We realize that it's the biggest source of emissions, which is bigger than anything else in the country. So organic soils at that point became a very hot topic in our not only inventory but also in discussions about organic soils. At that point, we started to do some research to understand what is happening in organic soils, what are emissions, because if you're looking to publications, we have quite a lot of information from boreal climate zone, especially from Finland, and actually nearly nothing from temperate or, let's say, central and hemiboreal climate zone. So it's tricky to the uncertainty range of emission factors which are provided in guidelines. It's, let's say, some thousands times between different publications which were used in these guidelines. So we started with, we were lucky with one project. It's Life Restore project. It was started in 2015, and the idea was to compare what is happening in former peat extraction sites. It's not the majority of our organic soils. It's minor part of soils and also quite minor source of emissions. But anyway, we get this project and we started with these soils. We use chamber methods. We are still using this chamber method, and it's harmonized with measurement methods in our neighboring countries in Estonia and Lithuania. So more or less our data can be compared. And what we got after this Life Restore project, which ended 2 years ago. You can see the land use categories which were covered in this project. It's peat extraction sites where active extraction is going on, sites which are abandoned but for many years are not covered by vegetation, sites which are abandoned, not restored and covered with vegetation, perennial grasslands, croplands with dominantly growing cereals and dominantly growing legumes, or with or without legumes in rotation cycle. Forests with pine and birch, dominant stands, raised bog as a control site to see what is happening in if you are doing revetting, and additionally transitional bog, then blueberry plantations in former peat extraction sites and cranberry plantations in former peat extraction sites. As you can see, the red bars are IPCC guideline default emission factors, and blue bars is what we got from the Life Restore project. For the most of categories, we got about twice smaller CO2 emissions. For methane, it was a bit opposite. Methane emissions are higher in our case. for N2O emissions, we are much smaller emissions than from RPCC guidelines in all land use categories. Maybe a bit surprising for us at that point was that we got clear net emissions from raised box and from transitional box, which were not affected by human activities. But yeah, it was maybe most discussed topic from the project results. And why we got these peaks, it's example of groundwater level. You can see there is a peak for methane emissions from transitional and raised box. It's in spring when groundwater level is very high. For drained sites, we don't have any methane emissions at that point. And then we have another peak when groundwater level goes down, sometimes to 1 meter in natural box. And then we have CO2 emission peak. So at the end, we have even higher emissions from these non-drained artificial natural sites than from drained sites. You can see that here are net emissions, methane, N2O, and nitrous oxide and CO2. And the best results come from forest lands, especially from pine stands, from cranberry fields. Non-surprising, highest emissions were from croplands and grasslands. And the rest of peatlands, including natural pristine wetlands and peat extraction sites, were about the same level of emissions. Doesn't matter so much what we are doing with these sites if we are not foresting them or fertilizing as a cropland or grasslands. The next step in Latvia, now it's a Baltic scale. We have joined the Latvian, Estonian, Lithuanian, Finnish, and German project on understanding what is happening with nutrient-rich organic soils. Before that, it was a story about quite poor soils. And now we are implementing this Life OrgBalt project and some other studies where we are trying to understand and model emissions from the majority of organic soils, which are making majority of emissions. The project is ongoing. We have 1 year measurement data, and next year is following. And after that, we will be able to say what is happening. We are trying to look complex, starting from soil fluxes and ending with carbon input with other materials like litter and pine roots. Preliminary results from forest lands, just to compare two situations, if we have drained forest and if we have pristine, naturally wet forest land without any drainage systems. What you should see in this chart that there is actually no difference if you are draining forest or non-drained forest. This is for CO2 emissions. If you are looking to methane emissions, it will be in next slides, but they are much higher in non-drained conditions because of previously mentioned reason. As predicted, the emissions in both cases were slightly higher in clear-cut sites because groundwater level was higher, and for other, it doesn't matter so much from species. It's more or less quite the same situation. And therefore, it's at the moment we are not calculating very correctly emissions from drained forest because we are assuming that as soon as we are making ditches, emissions are climbing up, but in reality they are staying about the same level. Yes, what is correlating with these greenhouse gas fluxes in nutrient-rich soils? It's actually this methane, it's the groundwater level. With nitrous oxide, it's soil temperature. No other parameters are correlating very well with these gases. What we can see, it's about the same like in wetlands. You can see that there is these white bars, it's naturally wet sites where water level is going down slower than in drained sites, but actually they are quite the same. At the end, in middle of summer and then end of summer, we have quite low groundwater level, about 60-80 centimeters, and we got two peak of CO2 emissions. And for wet sites, we got also methane emission peak of methane emissions during spring and first months of summer. Yes, and then another thing about methane, we got emissions only if groundwater level is about 20 centimeters. If groundwater level is below 20 centimeters, it's always, let's say, negative fluxes. So we have removals of methane in these sites. Yes, and now we are going to a situation in Latvia about greenhouse gas emissions. Not very nice figure. We are climbing up. The emissions are increasing, and we are approaching to zero level or even, let's say, positive balance. The organic soils in this balance, here is energy sector. Here is total emissions from the country, and you can see the last bar in 2018 that energy sector is quite the same like all our organic soils. So it's equal amount of problems from both of them. We are not accounting coal emissions, as I mentioned before, from wet forests. We are not calculating, not accounting, not reporting emissions, assuming that they are not anthropogenic. But actually, in forest lands, we have double amount of emissions. And yes, this is how organic cells mostly look like in Latvia, in central part of the country. So what can we do with these emissions to get this additional energy sector down to just to reach these climate neutrality targets? One option is go back some 10,000 years for a wetting. This is example of one river valley. It was river very long time ago. Maybe those animals didn't feed in these pastures at that time, but anyway, I'm not sure if it's reasonable and realistic to go to this period. Most probably we have to look for another solution, considering current groundwater level, current terrain, and other conditions. And also, if you are planning to go back, how far we are going. This is example from peat extraction site. Most of them have these piles of stumps, at least 1, 2, or even more layers of stumps between. Should we go to which is target, let's say, target point in the past when there are forests, one generation of forest, another generation of forest, or something between. So if you are speaking about management of wetlands, we should be realistic and do what is possible in these lands, not to point to something which is totally impossible at current conditions. Yeah, another exercise we did some time ago, it was to understand what is happening if you are closing coal drainage systems in Latvia in former peat extraction sites. About half of them will be afforested. The groundwater level will be quite deep and good conditions for forests. About 36% will be something between forest and something between wetlands, and 9% would be only underwater. So this is what is real conditions in these sites.
Andis, 3 minutes.
Yes, I'm trying to skip what I can. There's plenty of options actually what we can do in organic soils, but the most important question is, can we agree on these measures? And most probably we cannot agree. Most probably we have only few options which cannot be implemented in democratic society. And there is one in Baltic, it's afforestation. So at the moment, I guess most of LULUCF action plans consider only this measure in future mitigation strategies. If you are looking to the future in Latvia, then target 2025, it's manageable. We are reach it under any circumstances. Target 2030, if we are not doing anything, it's not manageable. We cannot reach it. Target 2050, it's quite hopeless. As you can see, the emissions goes up. We have red bars, which is emissions from organic cells in croplands, green bars, yellow bars, which are emissions from grasslands, from organic soils. We have wetlands, mostly peat extraction. So forests alone cannot compensate this for long. So there is one option. It's afforestation of organic soils, which seems to be reducing emissions. At least we have scientific evidences, and we are able to manage 2030 target, but we are still cannot manage 2050 target only with afforestation if we are not changing significantly and other measures. We are losing 7% of farmlands, which are used mostly as pastures at the moment, or something like pastures. And the solution which we are proposing is changing of forest management and deforestation. We are doing more intensive forest management, shorter rotations, better regeneration practice, more intensive thinnings, and then we are able to manage also this 2050 target. So, yeah, it's my, let's say, not personal scientific point of view, but I'm not Vladimir Putin. I'm not making decisions, but hopefully it is possible to do at least some positive decisions at the end for the climate targets in Latvia. Thank you.